Hello there, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mount. First of a new video series coming up, Classic Doctor Who Revisited and Reviewed. This is something that was suggested to me by one of my subscribers, and I do apologise, I can't remember who it was, and I'm far too lazy to look back from the video to find out. Somebody suggested, for more Doctor Who content, which always seems to go down quite well, is taking a look back at some classic Doctor Who stories and just talking about them. Not reacting to them, because I don't do reactions, but watching the episodes and then talking about the story. And the first one that was suggested to me, which I'm going to be doing now, is this classic 1976 yarn, The Brain of Morbius, starring Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen. A classic Doctor Who story. We all know it. I've seen it so many times I could probably recite it, but I'm going to watch it again and I'll be talking about it. So come back after this to find out what I thought.
Later.
Welcome back. The Brain of Morbius. Here it is. The fifth serial of the 13th season of Doctor Who, broadcast in 1976. What a blast I just had watching that 4-part serial. I've not watched that one for years. I mean, I'm very familiar with all classic Doctor Who. So if I want to watch an old Doctor Who story, very often I just have to close my eyes and I can replay it in my head. But it was nice to actually sit down and watch this properly again today. As I said, I haven't really sat and watched it for ages. And this is terrific. I mean, I'm a big fan of Doctor Who. I love modern Doctor Who. I appreciate modern Doctor Who. But it's so nice to go back and watch a 4-part serial that has time to breathe and time for the story to open up and develop its supporting characters. We don't get that a lot in Doctor Who these days. There's so much focus on the Doctor and the companion and rushing headlong through these 45-minute breakneck episodes that leave you sort of exhausted at the end because they just don't pause. But classic Doctor Who had this ability to just envelop you slowly in this developing narrative across a number of episodes, and it's so nice to go back to that and be reminded of that classic BBC drama period when drama series were made in the studios at Television Centre or with bits of location filming sometimes, and revel again in that great feeling of classic Doctor Who. Because I think with modern Doctor Who, I think the temptation a lot of the times is to sort of put old Doctor Who behind you and just focus on the future. But it's nice to go back and revisit the past, and it was nice also to watch it on DVD. This hasn't come out on Blu-ray yet. Season 13, criminally, hasn't yet been released on Blu-ray, which is a shame because it is a classic Doctor Who season, a classic Tom Baker season. It really needs to be on Blu-ray, so I'm looking forward to that hopefully coming out before too long. And it's nice just to have a physical disc again. I mean, obviously I have a lot of physical media and I watch physical media, but the go-to option is streaming these days. It's easy to stream films or download films. So it's nice to actually put a disc in the machine, listen to it whir into action and grind up. And it's actually looked very good. Bearing in mind it's a DVD, people always slag off DVDs and say, oh, the quality's terrible. But I played it on my 4K, I'm looking upwards because it's up there. I played it through my 4K player, through the projector, and it looked absolutely fine. It looked really good. It wasn't super high definition crisp, of course, but it served its purpose, and it took me back to 1976 when Tom Baker was in his imperial phase. Those first 3 seasons under the producership of Philip Hinchcliffe and with Robert Holmes script editing, that conscious decision that they made to move Doctor Who away from the possibly more childish, colourful adventures of the Jon Pertwee era and up the ante a little bit and make the stories a bit more dramatic and a bit more adult. And I'm a big fan of the Jon Pertwee period, as you may recall from my rankings videos last year. Jon Pertwee is my favourite classic Doctor because I liked his entire run. I liked the Earth Exile scenario. I like those sorts of unit versus monsters, gun battles, and all the action stuff I really liked. And I think that his whole run was good quality. Whereas I think, as I explained in that video, that the problem with Tom Baker is he had 3-4 great years, and then the last few years things tailed off a little bit as he became too immersed into the character, and he took too much control of the character, and in some ways the direction of the show. But I think those first 3 years with Philip Hinchcliffe producing are Doctor Who's 1970s peak viewing figures, peak creativity. This particular season, season 13, is Tom's second season, and this is where Hinchcliffe and Holmes were really firing on all cylinders. This is the peak Gothic period of Doctor Who, where practically all the stories in that season, with the exception presumably of Terror of the Zygons, which was meant to be in the previous season, every story in this season took its cues from classic Gothic horror, classic science fiction, classic genre. We had Planet of Evil, which riffed on Forbidden Planet. We had Pyramids of Mars, which riffed, of course, on mummy myths and legends. Android Invasion, Terry Nation's Android Invasion, is a bit of an outlier because that's quite a derivative sort of science fiction story, but perhaps has elements of Invasion of the Body Snatchers in it. We had the brilliant Seeds of Doom, with the season finale, which riffs on The Thing. And we have the Brain of Morbius, which of course is Doctor Who Does Frankenstein. It's an interesting history of the story. If you're a fan, you'll know the history of the story. It was originally written by Terrance Dicks. He created a story which was going to be a slightly more, sounds a bit Black Mirror-ish, a story about a man and machine, and where man found machine repulsive. And that was, I think, the driving force of the original story. Script editor Robert Holmes wasn't keen on that. He wanted something a bit more Frankenstein-y, and he rewrote Brain of Morbius into very much Frankenstein. Terrance Dicks wasn't impressed. He said to Robert Holmes, well, obviously do what you like with it, but can you put it out under some bland pseudonym? Which is why, as you saw from the credit extract, it's credited to Robin Bland, which is a name which Robert Holmes made up, as suggested by Terrance Dicks. I think Terrance Dicks probably had a good old laugh at it. So Robin Bland doesn't exist. The story is very much a Robert Holmes story, and if you're familiar with Robert Holmes's work, this has got Robert Holmes written all the way through it. It's very much in the style of many of his classic stories, with characters operating in pairs, couplings of characters. They're very strongly developed characters with rich, evocative dialogue. So the dialogue is pure Robert Holmes. It's evocative language that he uses, the way he describes things, the rich, atmospheric sort of words, which I love stuff like that. It is a throwback to the Jon Pertwee era, because they go back to the device which was used in the Pertwee era to get the Doctor into space when he was in exile, of using the Doctor as an agent to do their dirty work for them. The Time Lords put him somewhere to do something that they don't want to do. And that's something which they did in Genesis of the Daleks. They did it, of course, in Pertwee's time. I don't think it happened again after this. I think they moved away to the Doctor being more of a free-thinking wanderer. But here the Time Lords have sent the Doctor and Sarah Jane, played by Elizabeth Sladen, of course, to the desolate planet Khan, where in an abandoned hydrogen facility, which has been converted into a sort of Gothic castle, exiled human scientist Mahendri Solon, played by the brilliant Philip Maddock, who'd had numerous roles in Doctor Who throughout his career. He is with his oaf-like assistant Kondo, played by Colin Fay, who's only got one arm, replaced with sort of a hook type thing. They are working to find a new body for the brain of an exiled criminal Time Lord called Morbius, who has long been thought destroyed by the Time Lords, but his brain has survived, was rescued by Solon, and he's trying to create a body. In doing this, he's rescuing bodies from crashed spaceships. The Sisterhood of Khan, this weird cult of witchy women who have an elixir of life, which grants them a sort of immortality. To protect the planet, they crash spaceships onto the surface of the planet. But Solon and Kondo are finding survivors, and Solon has patched together this sort of mongrel patchwork body. He wants to find the right head to cap off his creation, his Frankenstein's monster. And at the beginning of the story, we see Kondo beheading a creature which has crash landed on the planet, this insectoid creature, which is in fact a mutant costume from the 1972 John Pertwee serial, The Mutants. I hadn't realised that the story itself sort of references that. In my sort of head canon, you sort of think, oh, that's a mutant there. Mutants are in space in the future. But there is actually a line from one of the sisterhood where they refer to the spaceship of Mutts, which has crashed on the planet. So it's a conscious thing to sort of make that connection. And I hadn't realised that until I watched the story again today, that there is that specific line of dialogue. It's an insect head. It's no good for Solon's purposes. The Doctor and Sarah investigate the refinery / castle. And of course, Solon takes a fancy to the Doctor's head, which he thinks would be a perfect receptacle for the brain of Morbius. What follows is 4 beautifully crafted, evocative gothic horror episodes. It's of sort of fantasy, family, horror, but there's some quite nasty stuff in it. I mean, it's one of the stories that did attract the attention of Mary Whitehouse, God bless her, the self-appointed arbiter of our tastes back in the 70s and the 80s. She particularly didn't like a sequence where the brain of Morbius falls out of its container and splatters sloppily onto the floor of the castle. And there's a few other bits that I think she had problems with, and I can sort of see it in a way because it is quite strong stuff for the time. I think you have to mention the production of it, which again surprised me because, as I said, I've always had issues with the story in a way because I was still sort of clinging on to that Pertwee era spectacle of hordes of monsters and gun battles and unit and all that familiar sort of stuff. Show was moving away from all that. I was moving into darker territory, and I sort of at the time remember thinking that this felt very enclosed and very claustrophobic, but that of course is a strength when you watch it now. The whole thing is shot in studio. There's no location sequences. All the planet surfaces are done in the studio, with the result that of course they have 1970s production values about them. They look very stagey, they're very clunky, they're very wooden. People are walking on the surface of a planet, climbing over rocks and wandering around. Their feet are clumping on the wood of the sets because at the time they didn't do what they would do today and put a soundscape of footsteps and an ambience that makes you feel as if you're on an alien planet. It's very much they're clumping about on wooden sets. They tried to hide the deficiencies of the set by filling it with dry ice to give the impression it's an alien world. There's a sort of a dark sky backdrop. There are a couple of sequences where it's supposed to be daytime, where it obviously got a lighter sky. But I was actually quite surprised by how effective and believable it was as a set. Bearing in mind, as I said, it's a studio set with all the limitations that's involved in terms of it's a presumably fairly small set. But they film it in such a way, and it's directed incidentally by Christopher Barry, who's one of the veteran Doctor Who directors who'd been there since the beginning, and designed by Barry Newbury, who'd also been there since the beginning. So these were old Doctor Who hands. So they knew the tricks to pull to make Doctor Who look more lavish and more expensive than it actually was. And, you know, for all the money that Doctor Who has today, and for all the use of things like the volume, which creates these huge planetary backdrops and things, I found Brain of Morbius more immersive and believable than things like Boom, the last season's episode, where the Doctor's standing on a landmine and the whole environment, apart from the floor sets and so on, is created by the volume. I believed in Khan as a planet far more than I believed in whatever the planet was in Boom. And I think that says, I don't know what it says really, but I think it says a lot about the quality of a really good script and a good story and compelling characters that sort of make you turn a blind eye to any production deficiencies. This was made in 1975, transmitted in 76, and it's obviously a BBC production of that time, but because it's science fiction, stroke horror, it sort of doesn't really look that dated. Now, TV programmes aren't made this way anymore, but it didn't look, I wasn't wincing or thinking, ooh, that looks rough, that looks ropey, apart from maybe one or two over-ambitious visual effects. But all in all, it was really very engrossing. I mean, the performances are fantastic. You've got Tom Baker, as I say, he's in his prime here. He's really, you know, he's flying now. He's still got that thing of, do I really trust this man? He's very dark. He has moments of humour, but there's something ruthless about him. The way he sort of speaks to people sometimes, he's very gritty. And it came as a marked change from John Pertwee, who'd become very avuncular during his time as the Doctor. He's accompanied, of course, by the wonderful Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane Smith. Sarah's a fantastic character. She always was a fantastic character, but she was one hell of a whimperer. And one of the features of her in Doctor Who is whimpering and squeaking and squealing at things that are going on. And I don't blame her. She does it a lot in this story particularly, because she goes through a hell of a lot. She gets drugged. She gets tied up. She gets zapped by a ray from a signet ring that makes her temporarily blind. She's attacked and chased by a monster. She rolls down a flight of stairs. She goes through a hell of a lot. So I'm not surprised she's whimpering. But this is a classic Sarah Jane squeaking, whimpering sort of story. It's quite amusing. Tom Baker's Doctor goes through a lot as well. He gets drugged. He's unconscious, knocked unconscious several times. He's almost burnt at the stake a couple of times. He has a mind fight with Morbius that knocks him out. He gets attacked by Morbius, who in his mongrel form has got this claw, which does quite a bit of throttling in the story. So I think Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen, the characters go through a lot, but their performances are spot on. And I particularly like the scene in the last episode where the Doctor and Sarah are trapped in Solon's laboratory because Morbius has locked them in there, or Solon has locked them in there while he's experimenting on Morbius up above. And the repartee, the dialogue between the Doctor and Sarah, it's so naturalistic when they're trying to find a way out and they're sort of talking the way that people trapped in a room would. You do realise what a great partnership they were, and the chemistry between them as actors is vibrant and bursts off the screen. Set design is terrific. The castle itself, it's unusual because the walls are quite high. Normally, BBC studio production, the walls would go as far as they needed to go because that camera wouldn't go much higher. But here, the walls are built high, so they look like castle walls or the walls of some sort of refinery. So whenever you see characters, there's a bit more wall going above them. And this sort of stains or like something has oozed down the sides of the wall, sort of slime marks down there. So it looks like a factory or some place that's ancient and has got a history to it and is in decay. And all the props, it is all the stuff of Gothic horror. It's all the stuff of Frankenstein. The elaborate laboratory equipment, the brain bubbling away in a tank. Things everywhere. Solon is a sculptor at first. He's sculpting heads and things. He designs for Morbius's head. And it's all this beautiful set dressing that I really noticed, particularly in this boxes and all things that make these buildings and places look real. The Sisterhood of Khan set as well is very good. It's this dark sort of cave and with this dais in the middle, and we see a couple of little tunnels and things, but it's quite threatening and overpowering, and it's very, very atmospheric. And the sisters themselves, these women dressed in these robes, were doing these elaborate sort of dance moves. They're doing these elaborate movements, and there is actually a credit in a couple of the episodes, and you can see there's a choreography to it because the way they move around, particularly when the Doctor's about to be burnt at the stake, they're sort of moving round, and you can see that there's particular movements. It's not just the director say, just run round and wave your arms around. They're actually twisting and turning, and it's choreographed quite carefully and specifically. Sort of thing they do in Doctor Who these days. You have movement coaches for actors playing monsters and things. It's interesting to see they did it as far back as 75. The Morbius monster himself, of course, is this mongrel thing, this meaty beast that's been sewn together from bits and pieces. And it's a fearsome looking thing. Particularly the top half of the body, it looks very meaty and fleshy. Down below the legs, it looks more like a rubber costume. You can see sort of creases and things as it moves. But it's got a human hand. It's got this clawed hand. The neck is nothing until this has this dish with a brain in it. It's very Gothic. It is very Frankenstein, and that runs right through this, like the lettering in a piece of rock. It's so Gothic. It's terrific. It's such a good story. And I appreciate it more, I think, today than I ever have before. I've always, I've grown used to it over the years, but my hankering for those Pertwee monster stories colours my memories of it in a way and colours my perceptions of it. Watching it again today, I just found it absolutely engrossing. And I'm afraid that my main takeaway from it is that I do wish Doctor Who would take the time to tell stories like this now. And I do miss the multi-part format. I do miss it, and I know it's a very old-fashioned way of making television. You wouldn't necessarily have it that way now. We have two-part stories that have a bit more breathing space, But even they tend to sort of have a pace that just doesn't give you time to settle and get into the other characters. And I felt that this was so absorbing. Characters are so well developed and so well written. And there was a lot of action in it. There was a lot of, chasing around. It was a good pace to it, but it had time to develop. I do miss that in modern Doctor Who. An absolute joy to watch that today. Really, really enjoyed it, much more than I did. And I put off watching it because this idea of this particular thread was suggested a couple of months ago. And I thought, yeah, we'll do that, but I don't know if I want to do Brain and Morbius because I don't know, I just didn't fancy watching it again, but I'm so glad I did. So once again, thank you to whoever it was out there who suggested Brain and Morbius as a place to start. I'm so pleased you did, because it's put me in the right frame of mind for more Doctor Who Revisited, classic Doctor Who Revisited. Brain and Morbius gets from me 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10. An absolute classic masterpiece of mid-70s Doctor Who. You can understand why the series was so popular and so well regarded then. It was this good. Right, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please stick around. There will be more of these. I'm hoping to be able to do one a week or one a fortnight over the coming months, weeks and months into the winter. If you've got any particular suggestions of classic Doctor Who series you'd like me to rewatch, even Colin Baker or Sylvester McCoy ones if you must, leave a comment down below. Let me know what episodes you'd like to see me talk about. As I say, they're not reaction videos, because there are loads of reaction videos out there, and I think the best ones are ones from people who've not seen the episodes before. I've seen these things so many times, my reaction's just going to be, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, that's good. I much prefer to just talk about them after the event of rewatching. So if you've got any particular ideas of ones you'd like me to look at again, you know what to do. You also know what to do is like and subscribe to the channel. Let's get those numbers up, please. On. So like and subscribe, leave a comment, tell me what you think of Brain and Morbius. Give me an idea what episodes you'd like me to watch in future videos. I will see you soon. Till I do, yeah, keep taking the stuff.